Okay, well, that seems to be about most of the people that are coming in for our Lunch and Learn today. Thank you guys. Thanks everyone for being here today. This is part of our Lunch and Learn series where we kind of discuss things going on in the wetlands and flood space over lunch for about an hour, and we'll leave some time for questions. And today's topic is about becoming a Certified Floodplain Manager, also known as a CFM. So if you're new or don't know as much about Wetlands Watch and are kind of wondering, okay, why is Wetlands Watch involved in flooding? It's really essential to our mission because it's one of the biggest risks across the whole state. And so flooding really affects our ability to bolster community adaptation and enhance natural resilience. My role is to run our communities initiative that specifically looks at flooding across the Commonwealth and how we can help localities become more resilient. We see flooding across all of our initiatives. We also have Stephanie on today. She runs our Catch the King, which is our way of actually capturing data to look at when we have the King's Tide kind of flooding, which is coastal driven flooding with the highest high tide of the year. So flooding overall is just really integrated into all parts of supporting this mission here at Wetlands Watch. And so just to give you guys a little bit of background about myself, I came from the marine sciences. Specifically, I looked at community risk to hazards and environmental health. And so by becoming a CFM, I've really gotten a greater expertise in flooding and how to reduce risk. I had a personal interest in becoming a CFM because of my background in environmental health. And I really wanted to understand the gaps in the national flood insurance programs in regards to health, particularly post disaster. So I've been at my role as our flood risk project staff here at Wetlands Watch for about a year. And I recently completed my CFM certification in January of 2026. And that's really important to denote because the test actually changed on January 1st of this year. And that's part of the reason why we wanted to put this webinar on today was to discuss some of those new topics and why it's really important for you to know if you're working as a floodplain administrator or just in the flooding space in general. So here is kind of the agenda for today. We're going to go over what a CFM is, how did it get started, why is it important, why would you be interested in getting this certification? I'm going to go over some of the classes that are available. Then we're going to go over the tests, including how it actually goes down, kind of the costs associated. Then we're going to get into resources. We're going to go into best study practices. And then I'm going to leave some time at the end for questions. I have like two questions for y'all, and then we can go into some other best studying practices. Just a reminder, I cannot go over or be asked specific test questions. So I can go over, resources to study, how I prepared, how I've heard others prepare, but I cannot answer any, what I cannot answer what was on the test is the best way to put that. And we're gonna see a lot of upcoming screenshots of resources. And so those links will be shared out after this, as long with the link to this video. Come on. Okay, so what is a CFM? A CFM is a Certified Floodplain Manager. This was an accreditation program that was started by the Association of State Floodplain Managers, also known as ASFPM, in 1998 with the goal to create a baseline testing of professionals involved in the floodplain management. And it's really expanded to be about around 11,000 people that now have this certification. And it is a way in which we can be better prepared for disasters that we come across. Really a big slogan is where it rains, it floods, and that applies to everywhere in the United States. And so, as a part of getting this certification, is maintaining it because there is new data showing where flooding can happen, different ways in which it can. Our land, our built environment is changing. So we're always finding new methods and ways to try and reduce flood risk. So it's really important to stay up to date with that information on top of federal, state, and local codes involving the floodplain are changing as well. So with this, you have to do continuing education credits, also known as CECs, to maintain certification. And so this renewal of your CFM will happen every 2 years. There's a renewal application, there's a renewal fee, which I'll talk about those fees when we talk about the cost of the test, and it's 16 CECs for every 2 years. If you are part of our Virginia CRS work group meetings, you receive these CECs about 1 to 2 for when you attend those, where it's a 2 hour long meeting. And that, just a reminder that the CRS work group is open to all. It's both in person and hybrid and happens 6 times a year. So that is one way here in Virginia in which you can maintain your certification. If you attend the Virginia Floodplain Management Managers Association conference, that will get you credit. If you can go to the ASFPM conference, that will get you credits. There are also different webinars. Sometimes they're free. Sometimes there's a small cost that have CECs associated with them. ASFPM puts on a lot. Sometimes other companies like Fathom just put one on about flood maps yesterday. So there's stuff available online to continue these CECs. And so, why do you want to become a CFM? It is a professional certification for floodplain managers. It really is a great way to understand disasters, flooding, and our floodplain codes, both at the federal, state, and local. You can expand your network. I really did not have as much about an idea of what a CFM was, except for friends that I knew that were planners. But now that I've kind of come into the community, I've learned that it encompasses so many different job backgrounds and that it is very diverse. I mean, you have people that are engineers, you have some people like myself who are more research based or work in the nonprofit space. You have planners, you have consultants. So there's a large range of expertise. And it's just, again, really growing our understanding of flooding and how to better deal with that risk in the country. For Virginia specifically, a good reason to become a CFM is through our main funding mechanism for flood projects in the state, which is the Community Flood Preparedness Fund, CFPF. When you get, it's broken down into 3 categories. And in the projects category, the one where there is bulk of money to actually get those projects, on the ground and done, it must be signed off by a CFM. So we need people to have this designation in the state to make sure that we are doing flood resilient projects, specifically ones that include nature-based solutions. And so I'm going to start first by kind of talking about some classes that can really help with your foundations of preparing for this test. So I attended this class. It's commonly kind of known as FEMA 273. The official name of it is Managing Floodplain Development through the National Flood Insurance Program. And so this is a 4-day course. It can be found at mainly in one location at the Emergency Management Institute in Emmitsburg, Maryland. Sometimes this class is also put on with the help of the FEMA region through different states. And there are also on ASFPM, they kind of have like an NFIP 101 course that you can take that is comparable to this. And so I'm just going to talk a little bit of my experience of going to the class and why it might work for some people and why it might work not work for others. So it was really good networking for me. It was about a four-ish, depending on DC traffic, up to Emmitsburg, Maryland, which is kind of on the Maryland-Pennsylvania border. This is an image of what the campus looks like at sunset. And so this was a really good place to instill basics. I was able to get fully immersed in FEMA and the NFIP and kind of all of the ordinances and how the building blocks build up to good floodplain management. Um, and so this was also an opportunity to ask questions face to face with FEMA officials, which was really awesome. Sometimes heartbreaking to hear some of the stories post-disaster that had happened, but there were so many people ranging at this in between the teachers we had in the class and the students. I had someone in my class from Alaska. I had some people who were from out west. There were some people from Florida, where most of our NFIP policies are in the country. And so there was also leveling of expertise. There had people that had been floodplain administrators. There were also people that they were going to be the one-stop shop for their locality. They were going to be the building codes official, the floodplain administrator. They were switching job careers. So it was really diverse in people's age and background. And really cool to hear other stories from other people, especially since I came from a more coastal mindset of, always thinking about tides. And it was good to hear from other people thinking about lakes or, rivers or maybe an area that didn't have as much floodplain mapping as others. The Something just to talk about costs. Obviously, this is up to you and your job for the timing to be able to go up there. They do have dorms on campus. You have your own room, own bathroom. It's not like a shared setup like undergrad or anything with air conditioning. There's also a dining hall, so there's a small meal ticket that you can buy that is cheaper than groceries right now. That's also in walking distance of a couple different places in town. And they also reimburse some travel. There is going to be one in August, though it might already be full. So this is one thing to just Google FEMA 273, double check the website, and go ahead and complete their course. Online course that's about an hour on ethics to be able to submit an application to go to this class. And I'm happy to talk any more about this. It is a really cool experience to go up there. It's where the National Fire Academy is as well. So there'll be other classes going on. There's even a community rating system class that also can take place up there. And sometimes they take place back to back. So you can kind of knock out both. But it's really cool to learn about our history and our fire history as well. So another resource that is here specifically for us in Virginia is through Virginia's Department of Conservation and Recreation. They will hold training events. So if you just Google VA DCR Dam and Safety Floodplain Management Calendar, this will pop up and this kind of shows you this month. They had two already this month. Wednesdays was about the new, Coastal Resilience Master Plan Phase 2, but they will have other online webinars talking about things that are often covered in the CFM tests, like substantial improvement, substantial damage, duties of a floodplain administrator. If this is going to be your job, this is a great way to understand kind of some of the legalities that go on with being the floodplain administrator and the responsibilities that go along with that role. Also, floodplain ordinances. So I try and market these trainings through the CRS listserv. And so if these studies our learning opportunities are not really up to your speed, let us know. We are often trying to get local trainings, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that later as well. So let's get into the test, okay? So this is just the basics of the test. The test is administered by ASFPM. And it is 100 questions. It is 3 hours. You're going to find out your result immediately. And there are three ways in which you can take the test. You can find a test center that is near you. This is on the ASFPM website. You can apply to take a live proctored exam in which you could take at your office or maybe at home. And then there are also in-person events. Sometimes a state or a state association of floodplain managers will set up an event for people to take it. So I took the test through the online live proctored exam at home. 3 hours really does allow you enough time to go back and double check your questions, or if you're someone that likes to flag questions and come back, the time frame really allows you to do that. For the live proctored exam, for this option, you cannot have anything at your desk. Your proctor will ask you to use your webcam to kind of show your surroundings. You are not allowed to leave your space or use the restroom. You cannot have anything else out. You cannot have a notepad. Your phone cannot be within reach. It's just really you and the laptop, and honestly, you kind of forget that somebody is watching you while you're taking the test. You cannot use your own calculator, but there will be one provided for you for just some basic addition, subtraction. There's no calculus on this. I really liked this option because I could really pick when and at what point during the day to take the test. Now, doing it this way, it's a little longer than 3 hours, not the time to take the test, but just getting set up with your proctor. And so I am just personally someone that I like to take the test after lunch so I can eat a good meal in the morning, maybe review a couple more things after a good night's sleep. You will not know which exact questions you got right or wrong, but you will get a percentage breakdown by topic. And so in a couple slides, we're going to go over the percentages and how many questions it can be for the topics that are covered in the exam. Before we do that, though, I'm just going to quickly go over costs. Because I mentioned earlier, for becoming a CFM, you also have to renew it, and there are some fees for that. So the middle column here is the fees if you do not become an ASF PM member. Now, there are different rates to becoming an ASF PM member. If you are a student, that is one of the ways that in which the member fee is a little less than others. But becoming a member before taking the test also provides access to study materials and practice questions that help with the floodplain concepts. And so there is a retake fee if you do not pass on the first try and need to retake it. And so this just kind of gives you an idea. It is a very good discount to become a member, and really does open up more resources for studying for the test. And so what does it take to pass the test? So a 70% is the pass, or higher. So that is 84 out of 120 questions. And so these are the official kind of topic breakdowns and where they bucket questions. So you're going to have floodplain mapping, also, known as FIRMS, flood insurance rate maps. Then you're going to have your National Flood Insurance Program regulatory standards and regulatory administrative procedures. I like to highlight the administrative procedures aspect of that because it's really putting you in the space if you are the floodplain administrator and going pre and post flood. Then talk about flood insurance. They have the next topic is flood hazard mitigation. Then the new one for this year that is now covered is emergency preparedness, response, and recovery. In the next slide, we're going to go over the documents that are associated with that new section. Then there are natural and beneficial functions of the floodplain, and then just overall floodplain management. And so this is the percentage breakdown of those different topics I just talked about and how they can range because the they're not all the same. And so the approximate number of questions per. So the big, and that's why I really highlighted when I was talking about it on the previous slide, the big chunk of this test are those NFIP standards and the administrative procedures. And so there is a note on flood insurance. The one thing you will absolutely not have to study for this exam is the risk rating 2.0. If you're not familiar with this, this is a new way in which flood insurance premiums are decided based on a new calculation of risk. This not covered on this exam. Okay. Risk rating 2.0, not covered. That does not mean you don't need to be aware of it, but when you're taking this test, it is not something you're going to get asked about. So the new section is that emergency preparedness, response, and recovery, which can still be, a good portion of the test. And so this was affected, like I said, in January 1st, and these are the different documents or things in which you would need to study to have a background in this topic. So kind of understanding our National Weather Service's Storm Ready program, looking at the Community Rating Systems Activity 600, looking at emergency operations planning, understanding our National Incident Management System NIMS, Section 1206 of the DRAA, preliminary damage assessments, debris management, public assistance, and individual assistance. I think this edition is really great because it really helps us prepare, like I said, for that pre and post flood and kind of looking at things. Debris management is something that is really getting brought up heavily right now, and it was one of the things that was highlighted during the FEMA Review Council last week. So 1206 of the DRAA, what does that mean? So that, this is one thing about studying for the test is understanding acronyms. So that's the Disaster Recovery Reform Act of 2018. I'm not going to go through all the acts today, but this is one way in which I'm just kind of highlighting best practices for studying. So knowing the Stafford Act, when it got passed, and then looking at the things I italicized. Part of this is, providing assistance to state and local governments for building code and floodplain administration, comes up a lot on those administrative practices and enforcement, including inspections for substantial damage compliance. And note that there, codes for a period of not more than 180 days after the major disaster is declared. So this specific language is the kind of stuff you want to look for when studying. And this is just one example of why it is important to study the acts that are brought up in the resources that are given and the Code of Federal Regulations. So let's move on to some resources. I'm going to start with the ones that ASFPM provides. So they have a library with links to all the documents that apply to the test, and I'm gonna pull up a screenshot of that in the next slide. They also hold quarterly CFM exam preparation seminars. They're 2 hours. And they're free. They just had one May 5th, so be on the lookout for when the next one is going to come. And just, again, remember that becoming a member includes resources for the tests and discounts. It also just provides another space to get tested on your knowledge. And so this is probably the website I went back and forth looking at when I was studying for this test the most, and it was this page. So it was Certified, Floodplain Manager exam resources. When you scroll down, it starts with every single topic and then all of the associated, FEMA documents, Code of Federal Regulations, executive orders under each topic category. So it's a very easy place just to see everything right there. And you could just bookmark this page instead of bookmarking like 25 on your computer. And so what is the single most important document? Probably, if you've been in the space a little bit, it is the FEMA 480, also known as the floodplain management requirements. And so this is the single most important document to review and highlight while preparing for the exam. This is also one of the first places you want to start. And so this is broken down into 10 units, and it starts with an orientation unit at the beginning. Each unit has a knowledge checkpoint at the end of it. I personally recommend going through this document more than one time. And like I said previously, paying attention to acts, paying attention to the codes, paying attention to if there was an executive order. And it builds. So you're really going to start at the floodplain, how we got floodplain management, why do we have special flood hazard areas? What are flood zones? What happens after a disaster? How do we emergency respond? It builds off of each other. A good thing to remember is that the NFIP is a skeleton, and then the states and the localities build upon that and create higher standards for building in the floodplain for what works best in their area. Another document that I found really helpful and was able to actually get a physical book of this one. I was never able to find a physical book of FEMA 480. It's pretty big. It's just one of those things. If you have an iPad, it's one of the best ways to view it and mark up. This one you can sometimes find an actual physical copy of this. It just gives a little bit more detail, but it does correspond with Unit 8 of the FEMA 480. Study the examples, but also focus on the theoreticals. Similar to when, if you're somebody that was studying math, you know, you can't just memorize the exact math problem in preparation. You kind of ought to understand the steps and how you kind of get your final result. And that's kind of the same for what's known as SI and SD. And so moving on, oops, I'm sorry, skipped. Again, another web page to pull up. And this is something I wish I would have better studied is the Code of Federal Regulations. Just like I said, the regulations build upon each other. And coming from the coastal mind space, we have the most because of those, including those tidal hazards. So it's really important to go back to the beginning. Like I said, where it rains, it floods. However, we don't have as detailed of flood insurance rate maps across the whole country. So you really also have to think about if you're in an area that doesn't have as many regulations. What does that mean? And so studying this and its title 44, both part 59 and part 60. And then you look at these sub points. So this is 60.3. This is a great space to look at the definitions for exact flood zones. And when I talk about flood zones, that means the special flood hazard areas, also known as the SFHAs, and those build, like I said, build upon each other. So this is a great place to find those definitions. So I just talked kind of about the flood zones, right? Another way in which you can kind of start and prepare yourself for this exam is to start where you live. Start with your surroundings. It used to be that these maps were printed out on paper, and that's actually what I practiced on when I was at 273. A lot of maps, not all, a lot of maps are now available online through FEMA's Flood Map Service Center, also known as just FEMA MSC. So when you click on this online, you can put your zip code in, you can put your city. I would go zip code because at first you're like, wait, I don't see any colors. If you just put the city, you have to zoom in a little bit. So here's an example I pulled up. Here is city in Norfolk. So there's different numbers. It shows that effective date. So that was when this map was created, 2017. The kind of lime green line is when you would go over onto what they call another firm. So the maps are rectangular, and that's how they're broken up to look over an area. And so the colors kind of distinguish which kind of different flood zones. There's numbers associated with zones. Those are in things to kind of look at and understand when you're studying for the exam. And another great resource is don't forget to look at the table of contents because that can explain a lot of things. And so like, on the previous slide, we saw a lot of that blue area. So that's part of the special flood hazard area. These maps now will show others about what happens with the 1% chance or the, in this case, the orange was the 0% to chance of annual flood in a given year. So, use the table of contents to your benefits. Don't just overlook it. And so here's some other best study practices. I just mentioned orienting yourself to where you live. So, a good way that you can also kind of start practicing is to go look it through your locality's floodplain ordinances. Can you identify if your floodplain ordinances are set to a higher standard? Or are there gaps? Maybe compare your locality to a locality over, or maybe if you're in a coastal area, compare to one that's maybe in the mountains or in another state. And you can find these by looking at that flooding section on a locality's website. I think one of the best study practices overall is make study cards and make physical ones, not the ones online that you can kind of flip over. And I'll talk a little bit more why I think making the physical ones are better. This really helps with the definitions, the codes, the relevant federal acts, the dates, the numbers, the ratios, things that you will see brought up again and again in FEMA 480 and the other supporting, documents. And I want to recognize that everyone's home life looks different, and so that can really affect studying time. This is what works for me, but find what's works best for you, or ask around. And so with that, I will go over some final do's and don'ts of preparing for this exam. So, do take your time preparing for the exam. You're probably going to need more time than you think you do, and that's okay. Some of us are all coming from really different backgrounds. But no, if you're interested in taking this exam, you probably already have some knowledge or have seen some application of things that are found on this exam. I mentioned it for the study cards. Pay attention to those ratios and numbers. Know your flood zones. Know what A is. Know the difference of what AE is, AO is, and not just the difference when you're looking on the map, but the difference in the code. The goal of this test is really to make you think like a floodplain administrator. That took me a minute as someone that was coming from academia and got tested a lot. This test is really in prep. It is really to prepare you for doing this job, even if that's not specifically what you're going to do with this certification. Find what study style works best for you. Again, check those executive orders and other legislations. Check out on YouTube for recorded classes. There might be another state out there that has some trainings up. If you're a professional engineer, I also have some resources for you. So please reach out to me, as one of my friends has a class that's with an associated cost that you can take for a kind of a engineer um, driven kind of CFM preparation. And just be consistent with studying, even if 5 minutes a day. That's why I say make the physical study cards, because you can 5 minutes. We're all bad about it. We can be on our phones, or maybe we are stuck at an appointment late. Having the physical cards there, you don't have to rely on internet. They're with you. They're right there. And so some don'ts, don't forget to study the Code of Federal Regulations. Don't just rely on one practice test. The practice test can help you gauge what knowledge you have and where your knowledge gaps are. So really focus on those knowledge gaps before you go and take the full CFM exam. Don't forget to understand the Unified National Program for Floodplain Management. That is found in FEMA 480. Don't be scared to ask your current CFMs questions and how they studied. Also, don't forget to know what acronyms stand for. They're used a lot, and that's another thing that I would put in the study in your study cards. And just don't give up. You're doing this for a reason. There's a great reason to do this, especially in a time when we're seeing a lot more disasters. If we all kind of have this background, it can really help us better build our communities and our neighborhoods up together. Also, if you're at a home buyer stage or you're a renter, having this background of being a CFM can help you better prepare for something for your home, as well, and learning about what the insurance covers and what it doesn't cover. And so with that, I will take some, we have some time for questions. Would you guys like to see a Virginia study group? How would you like to see study materials improved? We have a Virginia Floodplain Management Association. They have a yearly membership of $55. You do not have to be a CFM to join, but this is a good way to stay connected with people in Virginia. Our policy director, Ian Blair, is on the board, and we are also trying to work, and we would love to hear feedback about, where you would like to see some training opportunities in the state and how we could make materials better. And so after, we'll have questions in a second, but after the webinar, we will be sending out a flyer that has the do's and don'ts, some basics of today's, and then we'll also send out some links to resources. As always, feel free to email me. So with that, I'm just going to stop sharing so I can see people's faces. And so if anybody has a question, feel free to put it in the chat if you are still eating, or come off mute or camera. Okay, we got our first question. Okay, I mentioned the practice exams. Where did you find the practice exams? I'm aware of the questions at the end of the Unit 480, as well as the NFIP knowledge check on the ASFPM provides on their website. Okay, so the practice test, that's practice exam, that's the NFIP knowledge check on ASFPM's website. That's about the only practice that's out there. And so that's why it's good to take that one and take it more than one time. Anything else? Okay. Ooh, great question from Zach on how necessary do I think it is to take the FEMA 273 course. Oh man. Well, I will say, going to that class, I got a giant binder about that big with a lot of stuff in it. So That was really, really helpful again for studying because, like I said, I never got my hands on that FEMA 480 physical copy. So I had to rely on scrolling on my iPad all the time, which, got a little old. But, you have to do what you have to do. And that's why I also made physical cards. Um, if you have the time and it works with your work schedule, I think going to 273 is great, especially knowing right now that they are putting them on. If it's feasible for you, I mean, people flew in for my class. I drove. I do think it's really good. And depending on your job, it helps with more than just becoming a CFM. I think it just really helps with understanding kind of our federal processes. And even though things are evolving with FEMA right now, like I said, the 273 is the backbone and foundation on how all the rest of this stuff that comes up. Okay, so another question is, would you say that the questions on the practice exam align well with what is actually on the exam? I cannot comment on that, unfortunately, and I'm sorry. Um, so that's why I highlighted during the talk, um, use that to find out where your gaps are and then go hard on your gaps. Um, yeah, I'm sorry, I cannot say more than that. Um, okay, can you share how much time and how long you studied? Months, few hours a week, as an example. Okay, this is a great point. So, I started Wetlands Watch around April of last year, and in the midst of all this, talking about home life balance, my own house flooded from an internal water leak, had to move out, had to deal with home insurance, not flood insurance, home insurance. Um, so as part of my job, I was able to use, some of my hours a week to study. So I started with that, with the 480, then went to some of the other documents, went to the class in August. Now, mind you, I moved back into my house, had my wedding, and then I studied over the Christmas time, which I actually really, really liked because so much other stuff was slowed down. I would say on average, depending on our work schedule, 2 to 4 hours a week. And I wish I would have been a little bit more consistent with it. Um, is that helpful for you, Alyssa? Okay, awesome. Thank you. Okay, could I talk about my experience with taking the online tests, such as reading the maps over the computer? And if you have any recommendations for taking it home. Okay, yes. So funny story about this. I don't have the best eyesight and wear contacts. And yes, so that's why I wish I would have thought to go and look at the flood maps online because when I was at the 273, we only practiced on paper. When you're taking it online, of course, you have no paper materials. Everything is when you're online on the test. I personally did like taking the test at home. I was able to put my dog in the kennel, make sure it was quiet. The only thing that I had where the proctor was like, please, he was like, don't lean in because I should have been clicking. You can zoom in and zoom out with the maps like you can on the MSC. And instead, I was like physically looking into my computer more. And the proctor was like, hey, you can't like look in more, which is funny because you kind of forget that someone is technically monitoring you until like their voice pops up. So yeah, I think it's really good to familiarize yourself with the maps online. And that's just a general in good practice for doing floodplain mapping. I mean, also if your friends buying a house, you're buying a house, you're renting a house, just to have somewhat of an idea and just a reminder that that's they've like, we pulled up the Norfolk one was from 2017. A lots of stuff can change. Prime example, if you go look in the Outer Banks where all those houses have gone in, those maps have the houses, like they have houses that are in the ocean now. So the maps are how we decide the flood insurance premium. That does not encompass the actual flood risk of that spot. So, but it applies to if you're getting a federally backed mortgage, you have to have flood insurance if you are in one of those special flood hazard areas. So Alyssa brought up about the Wi-Fi going out. Yeah, I was somewhat concerned about that. I have sometimes had spotty Wi-Fi service. Sometimes we've had spotty Wi-Fi service at our office. If that's something that is going to stress you out, remove that stressor. Go to a test center. And that it's a similar situation from what I've heard with the test center. You basically you walk in with like nothing, and you go in and take the test. So yeah, I think that, I mean, it's been a long time, but isn't that kind of how you have to take like the ACT? You just go in with like a pencil.
Yeah.
So yeah. Does anyone else have any other questions?
Will has asked about how often the tests are offered.
Ooh, that is a great question. For the proctoring, that is why, see, I really like the live online proctoring. You could really pick like any time. That is the best way if you have a busy schedule. I honestly highly just go with the online proctored exam. Um, Other than that, I think every couple months. It is not. Um, I can go double check that and we'll put that in the notes after this, but I don't think it's as frequent as the online proctored exam. Okay, in terms of what to know how to study for the Code of Federal Regulation. 59 has a lot of definitions, which is great. Is it important to know what each part of 44 CFR says generally and not so much exactly what every line has to say? Okay, this is a good question. Um, yeah, it is a lot, obviously, to go over the code of federal regulations, but knowing, where the floodplain management is located in our code overall, and then the associated um, definitions. Like the code is just another way to read the building blocks that they show you in FEMA 480 when you start going down the flood zones. Um, so I would do those two things kind of together and, write down your definitions. Like you have to think about it. What do you need to know as kind of like a floodplain practitioner and what would be the legalities involved as well? Um, does that help? Oh, and thank you for mentioning that in Maryland, oh, awesome. You were able to schedule it 5 days a week. Okay. Yeah. And don't stress. If you have to retake it, not everybody passes this on the first go around. Do not feel bad if you don't pass it on the first go around. It's a lot of content to cover. So, if you take it, yes, unfortunately, there is a retake fee, but, you will know, what topic areas you maybe didn't know as much. And you can study those gaps and come back and take it. Don't, do not feel bad. about retaking the test. The goal is to think like a floodplain administrator. The goal is to, be prepared for flooding. Oh, okay. What about the revised exam with the new content? And what are my thoughts on that? Um, Honestly, I think it's good that they separated this section out, to be honest with you. I think it's good that they created because in emergency preparedness as its own part, because it's a lot of what we do, chairing the CRS work group right now, we talk a lot about how to best communicate flood risk to residents. Um, People understanding flash flooding alerts, understanding when your county or locality is at a different level of emergency management. Um, best coastal analogy to this is like understanding rip current, right? Like when you're going out on the beach, seeing that red, yellow, green, you know, understanding kind of what's going on in the environment around you. I think it's good to know. It's good to personally know some of the stuff on the emergency management side. And if you've never, you know, um, it is cool to go into emergency management like operating center in a locality. I mean, it is pretty crazy. Or if you've ever been to like a National Weather Service office, the amount of TVs, screens, it takes a lot, and there's a lot of people behind the scenes that there might be an emergency going on, but there are people there working to help get people the resources that they need and still be running, EMTs, fire, that kind of stuff. So the the new module is good, and it like I said, overlaps with stuff already and was in FEMA 480 anyways. Remember, just like FEMA 480 is like your center, and then there's stuff that branches like off from that. Oh, yes. Okay. So how long after I took the exam did I get the certificate or official notification email? Um, oh man. I think I got the certificate in the mail within a month, I want to say. So yeah, you get like, a nice little certificate, landscape style, just like, some degrees. So fun times. You also you can like they tell you how you can and cannot use the CFM logo. Um, I would say within 24 hours is when you get like an official notification email. And then if you go to ASFPM, I got an email like months later that I could go get a pin to wear and have a pin that says CFM on it. So yeah, yeah, within 20, I would say within 24 hours. Um, and again, if you would feel more comfortable talking in private about ways in like which Virginia or like VFMA you would like to see them help with studying for the CFM exam, please email me. And that is something I'll bring up because it is something that VFMA like is working towards and really wants to make sure that like Virginians are we're able to take this exam, that we have good representation across the whole state, um, you know, partly for that goal of getting projects through the CFPF. Also, you could like, oh, that's okay, Alyssa. That's okay. I know, because I will say there's been so much up and down, and we've had the federal, DHS has shut, FEMA has been on and off. That yes, the trainings have been a little sporadic, and that's been part of the problem of getting training. So that's why I do say like if FEMA's putting that 273 and it is available for you to go, and you're kind of at the beginning of your journey. Um, like I think it's a good way to spend your time and meet some people. Oh no. Yep. See, yeah. Yep. Yeah. You know, that's something we'll be discussing. And if you want to join, if you, you know, want to come to our next CRS work group, which is going to be on the 27th, I am going to be going over detailed FEMA review council. So. Um, with that, please feel free to email me on the side. Just a reminder that this was recorded and it's going to be put on our YouTube channel. So feel free to share with friends that might have had a conflict of interest today. So thank you guys so much for attending and asking questions. I hope this was as helpful as possible for what I could discuss. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Hi, Brian.
Okay.
Okay. Bye, everyone. Thank you, Stephanie.